I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes if anyone would like to.
I move to approve.
It's been moved. Any seconds?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Hey, Charlie. All right, on to our discussion of the growth and development chapter. Scott, do you want to?
Yeah, we've got, I'm going to say a few words here about the rest of the process maybe in this particular chapter, and then I've asked Jeff to give you another kind of quick review and summary of it, because it's a kind of a newer kind of items in it that folks aren't used to. So just to remind you that this was an added meeting, I believe, and we've got one more added meeting, July 16th. That anybody's gone out, Jeff?
We'll go tomorrow.
We'll go out tomorrow to folks. We tried to find the best dates to work with everyone's schedule, because that will be sort of a review of our next revision of the plan. So we've already started looking at all the comments you've been giving us over these meetings and making some revisions, and then we'll make our final revisions and get that back out to you, to the public, and then bring that back to you on July 16th, at which time you can review it publicly, comment on it, and give us any additional direction that you may have. The public will have had a chance to look at it. You know, at any time, the public can issue this committee their comments to you in writing through us. We're happy to take those and pass those on, posting it to the packet. So that's a little bit on the process. Growth and development, and I'm not going to try to steal too much of what Jeff says, but I just want to mention that it was one of the primary issues that came out of the citizen surveys and the stakeholder meetings we did, and also what we found in our analysis of Horizon 2020 was that it had about a medium level of attention addressed to it. Our comprehensive plan today, Horizon 2020, is very pro-growth, if you will, in terms of its annexation policies. It says that if you want to annex and there's infrastructure nearby, then the city encourages that growth to happen. What we have found in a lot of our just kind of listening to different organizations and governing bodies and planning commission, think that we need to have a little bit stronger growth management set of policies. Annexation should be mutually beneficial, I think, in terms of what it does for the city and its residents, and for the developer looking to do the annexation and make the development, and and get a fair profit for that development as well, because it really is part of the supply of the population demand. And we are at about 1.2, 1.4% right now. We've always hovered around 1%, 1 to 2% growth rate. And so we know that we have to accommodate population growth. And annexation does help us do that, helps cities do that. So I'll let Jeff kind of get into it and present you a little bit about our ideas with this particular plan horizon, plan time frame, because it does set the course for going to the next 15 or 20 years and how to accommodate that growth. And so after that, we can take questions and let you get into the chapter itself.
Good afternoon. Kind of just a rehashing of what we've seen before. The growth and development chapter kind of talks about some very important things, mainly housing variety and type, affordable housing, infill development, compatibility of the density designs like that. This was trying to balance the teeter-totter, if you will, between the need of growing the city versus the need of protection for the agricultural lands. That's why you kind of have a little bit of a dichotomy working inside of the plan here. But what we'll really talk about today is the three tiers themselves. Just to go over them again for you, the blue that you see in the middle there is Tier 1, which is inside the city limits. Tier 2 is the part where we expect annexation to probably occur over the time of the plan. And the Tier 3, the orange there, is a little bit of a composite of the current urban growth area with a portion of the northeast area plan that was in the sector plan was removed, having been carved out also. So the boundary of the orange there is effectively the urban growth area that Horizon 2020 has today. So the way that we studied this was we looked at the different curves and growth rates for the 5 municipalities. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with the 4 municipalities, Lecompton, Lawrence, Eudora, and Baldwin, but the 5th one is the unincorporated areas of Douglas County. They have a growth curve. So we accounted for all 5 of the growth curves in the model and figured out how fast each one was growing at. And so for Lawrence, we started looking at simply where are we at today? And that's how we determined Tier 1. That is the city limits of Lawrence currently. And so we started thinking, okay, we know that there are certain items that we have capacity inside the city limits. We do a residential lot inventory every year through economic development on the 4th floor that tells us the amount of lots we have available for single-family development. We also do a multi-dwelling inventory report to analyze the density and capacity ratios of our RM zoning districts, or our multi-dwelling zoning districts that we have in the city. So the last time we did, the model was based on, was about 7 years of existing single-family lot inventory was available, and about 21 years of multi-dwelling inventory lot was available inside the city limits. So that was kind of the basis for the Tier 1 analysis. So Tier 2 starts to think, okay, what's going on if we run out of land on the inside, what are we going to be going to next? So it starts looking at development patterns that we have, and it looks at the future land uses that are currently inside Horizon 2020 and our sector plans. And it just goes through those areas. It then takes a look at the fire medical response rate. This is a 6-minute response rate for the fire department. It then looks at the utilities and the service corps that we can provide with existing water and wastewater. It also looks at floodways. We've discovered people don't like to live on water typically, or where water usually comes in against their will. So we had to remove floodways from the consideration, so it can't put houses there. Then, I can find the computer one more time here. There we go. So everything that kind of works its way out is it takes everything that we can serve currently. So water, sewer, stormwater management, removes the floodways, generates Tier 2. Tier 2 is about 8.5 square miles, and working under the densities that are currently been adopted under the future land use plans for the sector areas around the city, it pans out to be right around 18,000 people that could live in that area as it goes up.
How many square miles did you say?
8.5, give or take.
How many people?
About 18,000. So, and that would approximately get us to, on our current growth rate for the city of Lawrence, would be enough land to hold us back till about right around 2050. Give or take a little bit on the years there, but it'd be right around there. So that would put Lawrence's growth at right around 124,000 residents by 2040.
124,000?
Yes.
Jeff, you said earlier that available land, there's 7 years of residential and 21 years of... Was that multifamily?
Correct. 7 years of RS zone land, and then 7 of RS zone, 21 of RM zone.
How much of that is buildable land? You can actually build on it,
For the RS, or
either one.
they're both buildable.
I mean, that's all that land, the topography's not an issue or anything like that.
It's a matter of usually utility provisions that would be the bigger item in that one, but yeah, most of them are buildable in that sense. There may be a few here and there that have some kind of unique issue that we're not able to track and account for, but most of them we'd expect to be buildable.
Have you ever done a study to determine that, if there's...
Not on a parcel by parcel basis, that would take a pretty lengthy amount of time for us to go through every piece of land.
Okay.
For the pleasure board, do you know the current square miles of Lawrence?
It's
For
just-
Tier 1?
It's right a little bit over 34 square miles. So to kind of give you an idea, for the way that the population would break down, the population estimate that we pretty much think Lawrence is setting that right about 2017 was just under 100,000, so at 99,496. About 17,000, give or take a little bit, in Tier 1 for the capacity. Tier 2 would be just around about 18,500, and that would work out to be about a 2050 timeframe where that land would roll out at. So it would be well inside the 2040 year mark where we think the plan would be at in that respect.
Jeff, you might go back to the slide. I just want to interject that, I've heard comments and questions about that green area, why there versus other options of growing. And there's some important considerations from a financing standpoint that I think should be considered in where our growth goes in the next 20 years. Of course, there's utilities and sort of the efficiencies about having utilities in the right places that have been master planned to accommodate growth. But there's also this idea that general government services can serve new areas without having to expand general government services too much. And fire stations in particular are very costly to operate. And there may be some expansion, over time of that service, but this is intended to, for by and large, stay within our existing framework of some of those services. And so if we were to go off in areas that spread us in different ways, that required new fire stations or police or other general government services to react in a way that we're expanding government too much, then I think those options versus this option would be a more costly option. So that's part of the framework that we've entered this thought process in, is where can we accommodate growth, but try to keep government, from expanding too much either. Eventually, we will need to do all of that growth with government services, but that was one lens we tried to look at. Because it's altogether possible that we actually have, virtually 360 degrees worth of potential. It's just how much do you want to pay for that potential? So that's one of the factors.
I know, Scott, or Jeff, on that, on the tier 2, especially in the south part, southeast part, you've got some floodplain land in there. Is there a reason why you left that in versus just a little bit down there on that
Are you
side?
talking kind of where K-10 crossing area is? Or
Yeah, it kind of
southeast
stretches
of that?
across there all the way to the southeast corner of the city. There's some floodplain areas.
Did you take out floodway or floodplain?
Wait, we left it
Yeah,
blank.
we left in floodplain, because you can't actually develop in the
I
floodplain.
know. Do you want
So
to?
we took out floodway
I know.
in our factor.
Yes.
If we go back and look at that lens for the tier 2, taking away the floodplain, how much land did that impact?
We probably have to run that model.
We'd have to rerun the model with that one. It'd be pretty significant on the south and probably the eastern side of town. Also, if
This
you
is
take
it
the
right
North
there.
Lawrence area.
And I don't want to fixate too much on exactly where the line goes. The idea is that what we're not presenting or recommending is accommodating the 18,000 new people coming in the water basin south of the 500 acres of the new watershed, for example, or the new sewer treatment plant, which is an option. We actually have that ability to, with new infrastructure, go out and sewer a very large area, and I think the next round of comp planning in 15 years, we'll be looking at, the choice at that point will be, do we go south of Lawrence, or do we go over the hump, keep going west in Lawrence? We know there's some natural constraints to the north. We know east, we're not gonna hit your door, and there's floodplain issues and floodway issues, and we can't go really southwest because of the lake. So, we're trying to think what's realistic today, knowing that probably the harder choice, the harder discussion is after this 15, 20 years worth of growth. Oh, sorry. Was there any more to your presentation?
That's it.
There are other things, obviously, in the chapter that take a different look at growth management. This idea that requests for annexation should be analyzed more deeply than the Horizon 2020 analyzes it, in terms of, is there a need to grow out? And is there a community benefit, or what is the community benefit associated with the growth? And we've tried to do a little bit better job of defining that in some of the sidebars and things, and what that would look like in terms of annexation requests that are made, and how we look at, okay, what are the needs? Are there needs, or what are the opportunities too? Is there opportunity to add to the park system? Is there opportunity for affordable housing? Is there a need, based on these reports that we do in terms of this residential inventory and multi-dwelling inventory, commercial inventories? We're trying to monitor the different categories of use so that we can put an analysis to annexation requests to answer some of those questions, along with the infrastructure issues that come along with any annexation request. So that's staff's presentation. Turn it back over to you.
Well, I would open up by saying, I think everyone's expected that this is probably certainly one of the more potentially contentious chapters in the new comp plan. And I know for a fact that there will be quite a bit of public comment from various sectors in the community here. So I'd be interested to hear what planning staff's response is to the argument that trying to balance growth and public benefit, and managed growth, the argument being the forcing the public benefit layer on new housing and growth and all of that may cause us to have prices that are so much higher than passed on to the buyer of those new homes that we almost defeat all of our efforts at affordable housing, that we're going to maybe artificially spike prices by adding the public benefit, kind of mandatory public benefit filter. So how do you, I mean,
Sure. So it's context based, I think, and the need part of that is I think clear to me, because in fact we have an annexation. We have a couple of them right now that we're looking at, where we can go to some of our data and recommend whether there's a need advancing through the community. And you're right, there are some competing issues in terms of the affordability issue versus restraining or constraining growth and what that growth looks like, whether it's infill or annexation. But so a couple of thoughts is, one, we have to accommodate all housing types. One of the strengths of this document is to do a variety of housing types, because people want a variety of housing types. Not everybody wants to live in a rental unit or a single family unit, and so there should be a variety of those, which is why we break out our reports in terms of single family use and multi-dwelling use, because we need to monitor those separately, in our opinion. So determining whether there's a need is, I think, fairly straightforward. You see what the annexation request will produce. Okay, is it producing multi-dwelling product? Well, we've got close to 30 years of that in the city, so maybe we say the need isn't quite there yet, because a lot of development is about timing. If we looking at single family, that's a different look. In terms of the community benefit, on page 14, our new policy 3.7 talks about the annexation request shall identify the community benefit or benefits provided. So that's going to be part of the process of working through an annexation request, is identifying whether there's a need that this particular project can lend itself to satisfy or go towards satisfying. And that's considered by the Planning Commission, approved by the City Commission, and then implemented through an annexation agreement. So that may be, at some point, we may have a need for a new fire station. And so the development may not be able to go forward until we see some land for a fire station. And maybe that's through an annexation agreement that we get some of that land donated to us, or it's paid for at cost or something. I don't know what that looks like. And there are other parts of the country that do this in terms of trying to make sure that the projects are served by infrastructure and services, the parks and rec and those kinds of things. So to me, it's very context-based, and it depends on the size of the annexation, what products the annexation is bringing the community, and then what the needs may be at that time.
is there like a matrix or like a list of the potential public benefits that, and a weighted, maybe I'm just missing it, kind of a matrix for the planning commission and commissioners to, or does it get to be kind of a subjective judgment?
Well, so page 13 on the sidebar, what is a community benefit? There's no matrix or, there's no matrix that points if you do X, Y, and Z, or you're meet these factors, then you provide this. So it's a bit of a negotiation, the way we're recommending it. But it's through this context of creation of affordable housing, provision of land amenities and facilities for a public purpose such as parks, public safety, education, culture and arts, utility enhancements, sort of above that required to serve the development. We think it's an important part of that, defining what that is. Preservation of significant amounts of environmentally sensitive lands. I can tell you in the annexations that we're looking at right now can meet both of this two-pronged test, in our opinion. And so we don't have the policies to put these tests to anything right now, but we've been looking at it as kind of a test case, and that's where we find right now. So no, there's not a matrix to go by. Maybe a good idea, I don't know.
Can you just give me a little bit of history as how this came about to require the community benefit? How did that kind of come about?
Well, it's really just based on where the current city commission is going with some of the incentive.
I know, I'm just asking.
I'm not throwing anybody under. So, again, annexation in my mind should be mutually beneficial. So it feels like, and this is debatable and arguable and everything else, but we know that every year we go through a CIP process, there are a couple $100 million worth of unmet needs. Not that the development community should fund all of those needs, but as opportunities arise, to at least not make them worse, we feel like those projects can be part of addressing unmet needs in the community. And that's the basis by which it comes out of.
So Scott, when you read the chart on page, it's not a chart, when you read the part on what is a community benefit on page 13, those are just some ways of providing a community benefit, right? So we have that retail market, no, not the retail market, but the housing study that you shared with us at the last meeting. That could be applied as a community benefit, is your thinking. Is that correct? As you could say, look, we have housing stock right now that will only get us through another 4 years. There is a community benefit to providing more housing stock.
In my mind, that actually goes to the need question. What might be a community benefit is if there were some identified need, just making this up, safe route to school or something that we needed easement for. Maybe that's the community benefit, helping to get to some other community goal that this land can impact in a positive way. Or if there's significant environmentally sensitive land, are they willing to provide more than the minimum required by the code? Those are examples of community benefit that might go into the thinking, consideration of it.
So just play that out for me. I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate here a little bit. So let's say the developer says, look, I want to develop this to increase your housing stock, but I can't because in order to annex that property, I've got to give, a certain amount of land for safe and healthy schools, and that is not going to make the project feasible. Are we giving up that opportunity to have that additional housing stock?
So I think this assumes that there are willing developers who want to annex and develop their property. So I think under that assumption, there would be another opportunity to look at a project and see if it meets the needs test and provides some community benefit.
Is that also where we talk about providing, as an incentive, more density? So,
It could be.
but
Again,
that requires policy changes. I mean, that requires more homework on this than.
Well, and again, one of the ideas being put forth is that there's an annexation agreement established that lays out how this property gets developed. And so it may be that that's part of the annexation agreement that we will employ. We do have certain codes that would allow increased density, for example. And our codes don't aren't intended to take away density by preserving more land. So you're able to take that density, put it elsewhere in the project, so it doesn't punish you for providing some community benefit. Because we understand, we recognize this chapter hopefully reads that it recognizes that supporting and accommodating growth is an important part of what our future looks like. So we're not trying to constrain it. We're trying to do it when it's necessary and when there's some benefit that can be provided. But again, that's just our proposal to you. There are many ways to look at growth management, right? Many ways to look at growth management. We're not trying to take too big a leap from our culture and our policies today, but we just felt like it, from what we were hearing, we need to have this discussion about how we're going to manage growth and annexation.
I guess it feels to me like it does give us some tools to not feel like we're required to take any annexation when it comes, but it kind of lets us kind of filter it through a lens of that mutually beneficial. I mean, it's not spelled out very specifically, but I just I kind of like that, and it's more of a give and take and make your case, and you know, we do need to grow, we do need to develop, but we can put some lenses on it that we don't feel like we're strong-armed into anything.
I have one question. So if this goes through and the community benefit part stays in as part of the need if you go into tier 2, what would happen to this if it was challenged in court? Or the state came up and said, no, communities can't do this, kind of like they did with inclusionary housing?
I don't know. I guess we would see.
Would it be something where we
I don't
revisit
think-
it?
It would have to be if the state law was changed. Our knowledge of how the state law works in this part of land use entitlement, there's no conflict with it, but that's not to say there won't be a court case associated with it. I mean, typically annexations are discretionary. It's up to the city whether it wants to annex the property.
So it would allow us to come back and revisit this if something like that happened?
Sure.
Can I ask a little about tier 3? Because it's not expected to grow in the time frame of this plan, but we do have certain requirements because it's within an urban growth area, certain
Right.
requirements of developments that happen out there.
Right.
So can you talk some more about, because I've had some questions about, is the city going there or not? Well, not within this scope, but we're kind of planning for that area.
Yeah, tier 3 becomes, so what an urban growth area really is an area by which a city gets to control its own destiny a little bit, if you will. So the way we have decided, the way our two governing bodies have decided to address that under the framework of state statutes is with joint subdivision regulations. So we treat divisions of land differently in that growth area in order to make sure that if and when it is annexed, it is meeting some of the goals that the city would have for land division, laying out some streets, cluster development, different things. That would just remain applicable in that tier 3 area. So that what it's really doing is holding that land for a time when the city might be able to extend infrastructure and accommodate growth in those areas.
Jeff, I'm curious if you know on the top of your head, how many units was in the HERE project? Or does anybody remember?
640 or
I
660?
think it's
Yeah.
6 something.
660 or 640, right now.
I'm just doing some math. Thank you.
So do you all, that was just kind of a discussion after a general statement. Do you all want to go from the beginning of the chapter and work through it page by page?
I'd like to put into context a few things for some of the new board members.
Okay.
Just going off of Jeff's numbers, something that's come up numerous times in our 4 years of meeting is the idea of density, the importance of it. And not density for density's sake, but the idea of putting more people in our urban core. the concept of putting low-income housing at the very fringes of the city is antithetical to the idea of low-income housing. It puts people away from core services, it puts people away from transportation, it puts people away from the schools. So it's not really effective low-income housing for that to be added as an amenity on the edges of town. Our lower income housing really needs to be towards our urban core. And so that speaks to the idea of density, and I think it's important to put these numbers in context. If you look at page 17, which is, it shows our planned density, I'm not sure where that comes from, Scott. I'd like to see those numbers amended, but
Which page on, Jim?
page 17, section B, where it talks about the planned density chart. Right now, by my calculation, we're sitting in a little over 21,000 acres, which means we're about 4.5 residents per acre. And if we just use national standards of household size, we're sitting about 2.6 per household, which means we have about 1.7 units per acre currently in Lawrence. Which means our current density is sitting very close to the very low level according to that chart. So we're right on the edge of low to very low density as it stands right now, which would suggest to me that we've got a lot of headroom to add density and to improve our economic situation by utilizing the resources we already have. What's disturbing to me about this concept of tier 2 is that we're adding 5,400 acres, and with just population calculations, we would get to a total of about 122,600 people, 27,000 square acres, the same exact population density, 4.48 people per acre. So this tier 2 proposition adds zero density to the city. And from my perspective, it's unacceptable. I would also like to see that this chart be updated to reflect densities that are more normalized for cities. To me, 16 plus per acre, you know, I could see medium density being 15 to 32 per acre.
Where do you get those numbers from?
Well, just thinking about a typical block, I mean, as an example, we've got to build, based on this plan, 22,000 people coming into the city, we've got to build 8,965 units. We could build 8,965 single-family homes on rural land now, or we could build 14-year projects. That's 14 blocks, that's nothing. Takes up almost no space on existing infrastructure grid. Now, I'm not saying we do that, I'm just putting in perspective in the context how little density this city currently has, how we're wasting our resources and our infrastructure by continuing to expand outward like this. And where I'm really concerned is the idea of adding amenities to these far out rural suburban developments that doesn't do anything for the greater good of the city. It just adds an amenity for that small group of housing, which is incredibly expensive on a per capita basis to serve. Whereas we could be adding all of those people, we're adding flexibility to our existing grid. My concern is, what Nancy astutely brought up, is that theoretically it would drive housing prices up dramatically, because there's nothing in here that provides enough pressure relief for that development to move from expanding outward to going inward. We have so much single-family zoning in this town, there's nowhere for this development to go. So by default, prices would skyrocket, and that's my big concern. If our goal really is going to housing, we have got to look at single-family zoning. It's unsustainable, and these density levels are inappropriate based on 4 years of conversation.
So, John, maybe a question or two. So when I think about the infill discussion, you know, there's only a finite, again, without wiping out rest areas and starting over, there's only a finite number of opportunities. And we've got a few downtown with the city surface lots as an example. And we have some other opportunities that make it into our multi-dwelling report. But after that, are you advocating that the new areas of potential growth should be planned at a higher density?
I mean, I think you can do that all you want, but that doesn't really solve the issue of utilizing our existing infrastructure system. You know, the idea of nodal development is almost passé, and this is what we're counting on. to think that we're putting more and more bodies away from the urban core is problematic. Sure, you can, but I don't know if that's what people want on that edge of town. People want their single family.
And I think one of the changes in this chapter is that the current Horizon 2020 doesn't even have a discussion about this issue, about where to accommodate growth,
Yeah.
as much as just says, let's go if you've got infrastructure. So I feel like it's addressing that issue a little bit more.
The bigger point that I'm trying to make, though, Scott, is that you're suggesting that we have limited opportunities. That's untrue. We have limitless opportunities in our urban core to add 8,000 people or 8,000 units. It's just a matter of, do we want to have the conviction and fortitude? to
You're
be able
talking
to
about
allow sustainable
replacement.
redevelopment of our neighborhoods.
And why do, and we have a priority of redeveloping our neighborhoods? And I'm not hearing that in the community, that we want to redevelop our
Low-income housing is
neighborhoods.
a priority, is it a priority? I thought low-income housing was made a priority.
I would say, from what I've learned on the Affordable Housing Board, the folks who run the programs that do the affordable housing actually want those units to be scattered across the community, not away from roads and infrastructure that helps people, but that the concentration of folks who need low-income housing to the urban core then concentrates that population in the schools, and it kind of creates a less than diverse community. So what they have tutored us to understand is that you want scattered housing across the broad community for low-income folks.
That is great in an urban context, but is also always predicated on the ability to achieve affordable, accessible transportation, which we don't have.
Today.
So there's different scales of the need for affordability, and I think the idea is that we have desired policies to give us the opportunity to take on all kinds of projects that might get us some affordable units on the ground, because there aren't many coming online, and so we're a little bit hungry for them, you're right. But this idea that they should be dispersed, those who have the greatest need for the service, absolutely, there's got to be consideration to that, and transportation methods help with that. But in fact, the federal government is changing their viewpoint of that. What the policies have done is create pockets of poverty and need, and that's been looked at. That light is changing, and we need to get those dispersed out into the community so that they can be mixed in with those who have different means of income and education, and it's the latest wisdom is that it helps everybody in that
But what you're
context.
talking about is a diversified neighborhood,
Yeah.
which exists in our core.
But it
That's
needs
a
to
natural development
exist
model.
outside the
That's a
core.
natural development model that's existed for 5,000 to 10,000 years. We've gone away from that, anything outside of Castle. It doesn't exist outside of Castle. We don't have a grid outside of Castle.
This is aspiring to do that outside of the core, so.
So then what's gonna happen to that secondary area then, where we just got nothing but single-family housing that's got no opportunity for redevelopment, because it doesn't have a grid?
That's some of what we're gonna be left with throughout this process, you're
So
right.
so part of my responsibility as representing neighborhoods is also the sustainability of those neighborhoods. Because housing has been commoditized after about 1920, those houses will be so obsolete and so out of style or out of fashion, they will be our new low-income housing. By default, through market forces.
So what are you recommending, John?
I'm suggesting, look, if you want to go down this path of suggesting tier 2 development, then we have to figure out a way to counter that with incentives for people to want to develop in our core, in tier 1. What we have here is a process where we're going to restrict tier 2 development. For good reasons, I don't necessarily disagree with it. But then we already have all these existing restrictions on tier 1 development. If you think about what the HERE project went through to get built, whether you like it or not, I'm not giving an opinion on it, I'm just saying, the process to get that built, when all we need of it, there's 14 of those, it seems to me that we should be looking for a lot more alternatives to get projects like that built, or even better, much smaller scale projects that can be integrated within our existing neighborhoods. But right now, we have a protectionist mentality, which is single-family zoning or nothing. And that's not going to lead to a sustainable, well-diversified neighborhood structure over the next 100 years.
So you're looking at multifamily within residential?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, the argument you make is not a new one at the table here.
Right.
It's been consistent throughout. And when I read on page 20,
Yeah, there's some language.
there's some language in here
Yeah.
that we asked for that start to maximize density
Yeah.
within our city.
Mhm.
I appreciate that, because that's something we purposely requested.
Yep.
Such things as accessory dwelling units, that was something we talked about. What I know to be true is. No, I don't know anything to be true, but what I think is true is when we have families and we have residents and we have community members who come to the planning commission, I don't think I've ever heard somebody say, I want a taller building next to my home. And I want a 0 lot line situation. I'm not disagreeing with you that from a planning standpoint, they may be the best at taking advantage of infrastructure. But I think we have to balance this, what the future may look like and how much incentive we can put to the very ideas that you're talking about, and balance that with what our community is asking for. I grew up in a fairly dense city, nothing like New York, but nothing like Lawrence. And one of the reasons I enjoy Lawrence is because it is, maybe it's a little less dense, you know? I don't ever say that when I'm mowing my yard, but I think we have to balance the two. We can certainly come up with a plan that pushes the direction that you're advocating for, but I don't feel in the community that I'm talk with, that that's the way they're going. That may be a faulty direction. That, you know, you make a lot of very strong claims of it will be the end of civilization, not quite to that point, but it gets close. I think we have to balance those two. I'm excited that we have some ways in here to encourage infill development, and would lean on that we even need more, and I'm sure Scott would probably agree with that. But we also have to provide ways to, I don't agree with you that all low-income housing has to be in the urban core. That's not where I see when you think about our largest employers, they're not all in the urban core. We're not a commerce-based city. You know, what's our largest employers? KU, right? Okay. Well, I don't think we're proposing any housing on KU's campus, right? And then school district number 2, city, you know, I mean, those are dispersed entities over the entire community, which would make sense. And then when we have our primary employers, they're actually out on the edges of town. Am I correct? I mean, so as I'm thinking about that, I'm not sure I agree that the smartest thing is to put high density, low income housing in your urban core. I can think of a few communities that did that, and that I think now we could see in Chicago and some of those, that's not a good plan. I mean, so.
Well, I think you misunderstand my concept is that you want to put people where the services are, instead of putting them in a position where they rely on transportation they don't have.
But John,
That's
we
the
don't have a
difference.
grocery store downtown. That's a service.
That's incredibly, I mean, what does that speak to? I mean, that speaks to our zoning code. We don't have a grocery store downtown.
How does that
because
speak to the zoning code? I
Yeah.
don't quite follow that.
If we had different zoning code, that would have been built a long time ago.
John, I do think if,
That, I mean, that's specifically related.
You don't think
to
it's
that
market
zoning.
driven?
It's absolutely, why are we requiring parking, so much parking for that site? Almost all restrictions of development are in our core or in existing tier 1 are restricted by parking. because parking requirements are so oppressive relative to the developments trying to be built.
So I'm gonna jump in here
Because
and
parking not required downtown.
recognize that we have,
That's not downtown.
we have quite a bit more to do in about an hour's time.
It's got a parking requirement.
I'm sorry.
It's on the wrong side of the map.
So is the answer to this, though, primarily work within the city commission in terms of creating those incentives, creating the things that would help encourage the infill
Well, I-
development based off of the direction this is trying to take us,
Yes,
I mean,
and
is
I
it
appreciate a planning
policy
commission,
work?
I appreciate a planning commissioner's perspective, because to me, pages 20 and 21 provide some new policies to help support integrating higher density residential development in neighborhoods and prioritizing for growth and redevelopment in tier one. I mean, those are all kind of new to the game in terms of considering projects. And so, you know, I encourage you to look at that through John's lens and see if we're, because I think it meets some of that, not all of it. I mean, we're trying to balance it, but they're different than what we have today in Horizon 2020.
Don't get me wrong, I think there's really good stuff here. The point I'm trying to make is when you're talking about bigger numbers and we're looking at this, and I'm trying to put it in context, when we look at that right there, that implies zero density improvement. And my concern is that you might have all this stuff here, but this is just stuff. The rubber meets the road is if this is where we're headed when we look at our numbers, or if we say something that 16 units per acre is high density, then really it could be considered medium.
Well, I
Then we've got language in here that is suggesting that we don't really want to add density.
And I appreciate that. I think where the opportunity lies for that is in tier two, actually, is two places, downtown near campus and in tier two. One of the things we will need to do after this is adopted is revisit our sector plans to see what needs to change. One of the things that may need to change, if we get a higher density kind of vibe going for new areas, is to go back to the west of K10 plan and update those sector plans with our new goals for things like density. So tier two capacity under the current land use supports this many people. It doesn't have to. It could support more based on changing land use goals and policies.
Well, that's the start of the conversation.
But they need to be
Is that,
in here.
I mean, if we're saying, effectively those numbers mean we're adding about 9,000 units. I see no reason why we can't add half of those units to tier one.
Okay, so I've got that comment. It's something that we can work on with our next version of the plan.
Okay, well, the one comment I would make, just because it's been shared with me by a couple of different sectors out in the community, is the very thing, Patrick, that you said we worked for, that number 6, the maximized development opportunities within Lawrence before expanding into tier 2. That there's no surprise that that's going to get some pushback out in the community because of the strength of that word, the direction that we would, it kind of implies force development in tier 1 rather than encourage. And so I think, you know, one thing that occurs to me is that certainly both elected bodies and the planning commission, orientation to this plan, once it's adopted, orientation to it to help everyone understand who hasn't been through this long process, the rhyme and reason behind the tiered system, and to really try and deeply understand why this is what it is, because it'll take some backbone to stand up for this plan as it's, in order to live out the goals. And I think it's kind of going to be incumbent on you, frankly, to help the boards understand what's at stake and how much we need to understand. Just saying.
So,
to me, this goal does a couple of things. It lends support to say yes in the right context of things versus all the pushback we get from projects where it's easier to say no, maybe, you know, in infill kind of ways. But it also lends itself to that discussion of need. Thinking of some very recent examples, if you think about maximizing Tier 1 first, we are at, I think, getting to be a pretty critical point on those who want single-family housing choices. Because we're down to between 2 and 6 years worth of inventory. And we've already had to make some choices about giving up some industrially zoned land to accommodate residential. So if that's not accommodating, if that's not, you know, encouraging growth in the city first, I don't know a better example than to give up industrially zoned property for residential instead of growing out. And so we're going to be having to make some of those choices about, to accommodate all the housing choices. Yes, we're going to see what are the opportunities inside the city because we already have infrastructure and services here. But once all those opportunities are, for the most part, at their, you know, at their end or fulfilled, we have to look at annexing and growing. And I'm not sure that this restricts growth in Tier 2. It's not a no-growth plan. It's a, let's do it in ways that are smart for all involved. And that's what it's trying to weigh, all those different perspectives through the lens of the people that are here paying for services, through those who want to supply the demand, from the future people who get to live in that supply or work in that supply or commerce in that supply. And so it is a little bit different, which puts a framework around the discussion about when and how and where to annex. So I don't consider it a no-growth plan. I do think that just based on our own financial reasons, we have to start looking at this from a financial perspective. All of the unmet needs that we have in the community, both city and county, I think, that's the only way we can look at it these days. We don't have this unfettered opportunity for growth in my mind. I don't know if that answers the question or puts it in some sort of context or basis for you, but that's what these goals are trying to accomplish. Not to say no or yes or this and that, but it's to have a good discussion around the framework of it.
So I think that's great. We'd like to see a mechanism where we can measure the economic impact and or future costs of development into Tier 2. But that must be measured against the opportunities we're foregoing in Tier 1.
Keep in mind, you have to measure the Tier 1 also, because the Tier 1 infrastructure is not in place to handle anything. And so it's gonna have to all be rebuilt if you put this high density in.
For Tier 1?
Mm-hmm.
Also,
You don't have enough capacity in a lot of the places to put them in play.
Yeah, there are some parts
We have
that,
parts of town that you can't do it, because there's not enough capacity in the line. You can't go put 4,000 people in that spot, because it's old infrastructure. So just keep that in mind as you're making all those decisions. When you start talking about putting stuff in old, you're
it's
putting.
not even close. It's not even close to cost comparison.
I've heard that before, and then all of a sudden try to upgrade everything in those communities just costs a fortune, because it's all infrastructure. So all I'm saying is, it's not all sunlight and green, trying to do that, I'm for it, I have nothing against it, but the cost.
Study after study is coming out that low-income neighborhoods in core cities are actually a net gain to the city in tax production versus cost, versus the suburbs where it's a net cost to the city. And I'd love for us to start measuring development in those terms. And if you start doing that, then we might start having to make some real hard decisions about where multifamily goes. And I would caveat that the idea that we're at this turning point for single-family housing supply because of demand, that demand is skewed because most people don't have the multifamily options that are available in other communities because of zoning restrictions. Many people that I know would love to live in multifamily in this neighborhood or near downtown, but there isn't enough multifamily variables to offer. There's just not enough product to offer. There's no row houses or townhomes. There's no higher-end condo projects other than a couple on the street. There's not a lot of available mix of diversified multifamily available because it's not allowed in zoning.
And really, not long ago,
Yeah.
there wasn't any, I mean,
Yeah.
Who gave us
Kind of
all
a-
that?
It was on
Who
the
gave
back.
us all that land?
the door is open.
Right on.
Yeah.
And the discussion is there, because now we have something we can turn to and say, we've tried that, it's been successful, what else is out there? So I think the trajectory is good, and I think it will continue to be.
Well, it is good from the market standpoint, but I'm pretty concerned because we just downzoned the neighborhood. The closest neighborhood to downtown.
Yeah,
It's
we,
antithetical to what communities are doing all over the country, which is upzoning, and we just downzone.
well, we zoned it to its use, yes. But we've also shown you
That's
that
crazy.
we've got 30 years of opportunity for multi-dwelling. And so there's plenty of opportunity. I think a little bit goes back to what the market demand is for the housing choice and the product, and what people in Lawrence, Kansas want to live in.
I would argue that.
By the way, the city doesn't build anything, right? We
Well,
just
I don't know,
accommodate
you
the
have
building
parking
of stuff,
restrictions, you
so.
have development
yeah.
restrictions, right? So developers are restricted on what they can build based on the code.
But where is the code restricting multi-dwelling opportunities?
Parking, period.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump in again and say I don't think we're gonna get anywhere solving this issue. It's a good conversation. It's definitely gonna come up in our public meetings. I think there's gonna be a lot of difficult public comment to take in, a lot of artful responses, and staff, it's gonna be up to you to help educate all of us on how to navigate all of that as it comes. I have a super, probably unimportant question, but I'm looking at this map, on page 21, map 21. And there's this kind of a snake-like projection that's blue. So it's tier 1 city and it goes north of the river.
That's the
Has a
city
little
park.
open-
That's the city park, along the river, the north of the river.
Okay, and so that
That's
is,
all parkland.
that's included in tier 1, but it's really not
It's just,
developable land, though, right? Anything that's within the city limits is
Is
all
the-
tier 1?
yes.
Okay,
Regardless of whether it's,
correct.
yes, regardless.
okay.
Was that sort of the land that Core gave us or something like that, with their back land?
It wasn't the core, I'm not sure how we got it, to be
Okay.
honest.
That answered my silly question, thank you.
But I mean, you see the airport, you see, the softball complex and all, that is core land at the southwest area, but it's just denoting the city limits at this time, this
Okay.
particular time.
Thank you. All right, moving on, we have about 45 minutes or so.
Can I say how pleased I was that the rural character got moved up to goal number 1?
Just for
Just
you.
throw that out there. I'll accept that. So we're going page by page now?
I would invite you to just, I guess, go page by page. And
What page are we starting on?
12, let's start with 12.
Can we say on that sidebar, serviceable by city fire, because we do a damn fine job in the county? But that's what's meant there. so.
Right.
Under
Tier
It's
1,
Each in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, they all have fire infrastructure. I think you mean probably fire service infrastructure, more specifically the city.
Good catch.
On page 13, under 2.2, I'm just curious what this residential valuations to income ratio, can someone explain that?
Yes, Jeff can explain that.
Is there a data table on that, or is it just a concept?
The running ratio based on the income of the city against property values and taxes that go into it. So it usually runs somewhere 4, 5 is the ratio for that number that we've kind of typically seen in the city. But it would be measuring it against itself in some respects and based on its last 15 years of numbers to kind of give it some baseline value.
So income is the city government's revenue, or is it personal income?
It'd be based on if it's personal income. I can't remember if it's household or if it's just personal income that we get from the Census Bureau.
It's just one more factor into the affordability of housing to consider.
So then is the larger that number, less affordable housing is? Just trying to make sense of what this means.
Usually the way it works, if the number starts to go up, say going up 7 or 8 in that number, then yes, it's becoming where land is outstripping wages in price, or housing is outstripping wages.
On to board.
Yeah, just curious, I've had previous discussions outside of here about just ways of thinking about how the decline of neighborhoods might be captured with the metric. And, you know, if overall the city, what would be the right way to measure that, I guess? So concerns around, if you keep building here, then it's gonna cause a loss somewhere else. I was just thinking, is there a way to find that in a metric? And if you look at residential valuation income ratio by neighborhood, that might be a way to capture it. I was curious about that.
You ready to move on to page 14?
Whatever page that might be, we're working on to the
13.
For the island annexation, is that still, I mean, if the landowner asks to be annexed, or is there some other kind of method that's being proposed?
So there's two forms of islands when we talk about annexation. One is where you're,
This would be the,
this would be where the city
Unincorporated within the
is
city.
around
yeah,
the unincorporated areas, and where they're likely, they may be getting, where it makes sense that they're getting fire service, police service, who probably are maybe giving them water, that kind of thing. They should be annexed into the city. They become part of the city fabric.
so
So
it
it would-
initiates that,
The city would initiate that.
okay,
So it
is
would
that a
be
new direction?
I think this is in existing Horizon 2020.
Is it?
it-
Okay.
Just
Might have
isn't
been
practiced all
reworded.
that well.
Slightly,
Okay.
but it's the same sentiment that was in the previous one.
Okay, is there a lot of pushback from people that own those islands, I imagine?
Yeah, there can be,
Uh-huh.
unless and until they need some services, and then there's usually, it's usually not a group mentality, it's more an individual, my septic failed and code says I need sewer, so. But from a city's perspective, right, not necessarily the individuals, because it can have tax implications and things. From a city's perspective, if you're already there, part of the urban fabric, then it makes sense from the city's perspective, more often than not.
Mhm.
3.4, can somebody explain how you calculate the maximum return?
I'm not sure we have a metric for that at this time.
Should it be a task?
Could be in the
It's not in
addendum.
no, it's not.
Okay.
There are communities that are doing that. No.
Really? There's some metrics out there
There's some
that,
metrics out there that are starting to do that on board. So it's definitely good exercise.
one more question on 14.
On to page 14.
On 3.8, where it says annexation request for single users under 5 acres, does that also mean that anything less than 5 acres can only, when you say single user, just one person can build on it? One person is building on it?
Then it's sort of a one project, maybe it's a community facility or one use of it, but the idea is that there should be a threshold for when you look at what the community benefit is. And we thought that something under 5 acres is not significant enough to get to the point of looking at that issue. But
So does that mean it could be single-family homes on 5 acres?
Several of them?
I think for the single user component of that, I'll look to staff to jog our memory on what we were intending there.
It was intended for something like a larger industrial facility that may need 5 acres or something beside that, where you have commercial, usually not single family because you have multiple splits in that. But if you had a care facility or a hospital or something that would be in that larger one user scale would be in that item.
Should that be better clarified than?
Clarify that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, because 5 acres
Yeah.
can be meaningful
Yeah.
in the city.
You say one person will buy it and buy it.
Or just keep annexing in 5 acre parcels.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, ready to, well, let's see, page 15, that's the map.
Residential then?
Yes, on to page 17.
1.3, just as clarification, so create zoning regulations to provide guidance and protection for the county's historic unincorporated towns. There currently is nothing, is that right?
Correct.
So it would be, this is a new addition?
Correct.
Okay, I was just curious.
Can I go back to my statements earlier about really looking at where these, I'm just curious, where did these planned density numbers come from?
They're within the existing Horizon 2020 today. Those will get applied to our sector planning.
You know, as I showed, demonstrated just by looking at the map, they're woefully low. One aspect of that is just reading the plan, it just projects the idea that 16 units per acre is somehow high density. There's already a lot fewer, kind of an attitude about what density is here. Patrick alluded to is that just by associating the term high to something already makes people not want it, not really realizing what it actually means. 16 units in an acre is not very many.
Can I ask related to that on the sidebar? Because then we have a density, with the zoning districts that has, some of the high density, which is RM24, RM32. How are those two charts related to each other?
So the RM24, the number after that RM denotes the
Units
number
per
of units
acre.
per acre.
But then on the other, then high at 16 plus, so just.
Well, so there's always
Okay,
been
so
this issue between the comp plan and the development code, the zoning, that 32 units is actually as high as we go in our current code. It used to be up to 54 units per acre before 2006. And we have had some projects, we do have some codes that let you go past 32 units per acre if you do some development bonuses and things.
Then what does that fall under? It's above the 32.
So it's RM 32 with a planned development overlay. In fact, here was an example of that. They increased their density pretty significantly. A couple other projects over the years have done that. But I've noted on my list, John, to take a look at all this and come back with a,
And also, just to clarify, there's a note, There's a note that's underneath that density table that starts to try and explain those differences between the density table and the zoning district table.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'd like to put it in context for the board. An acre is about 7.5 city lots, so like a normal city lot just down the street or Oriat or before we get into the further development. So 16 units on 7, that's basically just a duplex. That's what 16 units per acre is, a duplex on a normal city lot. An ADU or a house is 16 units per acre. So if you have one house on a lot and one ADU, that effectively is the same density as 16 units per acre. So I think this scale is so far skewed to almost no density that I'd really like to see that improved to match reality of what reasonable density is.
Is there a map that kind of shows the density using this residential density designation? Different from our zoning maps. Yeah, using these standards, I'm kind of curious
Yeah.
to, like,
What the city would look like.
yeah, if I just drove around in one of these areas that's considered high or medium or low, like what would it feel like to me?
Well, yeah, Charlie, to put it in perspective, you know, when I did the calculation, we're at 1.78 units per acre right now. If the whole city is 1.78. So just
Right.
about anywhere you are is low, very low, or rural.
Well, but you've used in your calculation, the university and all the industrial and parks and I mean, I don't know if that's fair. You gotta look at it in
Double it.
only the residential.
You could double that number, you're still at 3.
I think I was in Brook Creek this weekend looking around,
Yeah,
and a lot of small lots, small homes,
yeah.
and I'm curious where that fits in this matrix.
That's probably low, high end of low. I mean, from a gross
Wow.
density standpoint.
So to get to John's point, like, where would I find medium? Or where would I find high in our community?
I think it's more project-based, so some of the apartment complexes would be medium. Here project would be high. It's difficult to point to areas of these because I don't disagree that we're at a
Yeah.
low to medium density
That's
kind of
way out there.
citywide.
The
That's probably more
residential neighborhoods
That was
by
medium
default are
right
gonna be
there?
low,
It's
or
on
very low.
15.
That's a big one.
All single family is low.
So we don't have any map like that? Like,
I don't think do we have a density map?
I think Horizon 2020 has the existing one that was used back in 1998, 99. They would have that in there as part of the time there.
And it's tricky because it doesn't have medium, was that what we were using?
It lumps medium and high together and very low and low together to map it out because otherwise it gets a little hard to read back in the technology that was available.
Is something that would be beneficial to do again, to update that and to see where our density is and where we have more?
We'll add it to the list.
I think it's time to move on,
So
because
Scott, you had,
I wholeheartedly believe all the things you're talking about today, density that you want local, the stuff you want outside, is gonna change dramatically with the transportation infrastructure that's gonna change. And so, we're basing everything on history, not on the future. And so when I look at that, I go, it frustrates me to see spinning in a circle that is using history, not the future.
I'll take 10,000 years of history.
Take whatever you want, doesn't matter, you need to look at the future. and
okay,
decide how you
I'm
move on.
gonna jump in again.
Go.
Scott, you've got your notes on
Yep.
how you're gonna think about this and
Yep.
address it. So let's move on to page 18.
Yeah.
2.8 is not listed under the implementation plan. And it just read to me like that would be an action item. So I wasn't sure if that And just revise something sounds like it's a due item.
Okay.
Anything else on 18? Moving on to 19.
At the top of 19.3.3, they encourage cluster residential development. Isn't that more of a tier 3 thing, and shouldn't, by tier 2, shouldn't we be doing actual urban, things that are going to be annexed into the city? We're not going to still be doing cluster residential development in that tier 2, are we?
They will have, owners will have an opportunity to develop to that, if for whatever reason, if they're still a ways away from the city in terms of infrastructure. I mean, there's still a lot of choice that owners have about how their land develops. So we're saying that if they make that choice to develop, it should be with cluster development.
Okay.
Scott, in your mind, is there any chance that something in tier 2 could become in tier 1 by, in 3.1, it says collaborate with state, local, or private entities to plan and invest in infrastructure. And part of the reason tier 2 is because it doesn't have the infrastructure. Is that right? Am I understanding that correctly?
It does not have infrastructure
So if we
today.
collaborate with them and they do it, I don't know where I'm just trying to think of, would that cause an area to go from tier 2 to tier 1?
There's also the distinction between tier 1 and tier 2 about annexation. So
Okay.
tier 1 is annexed, tier 2 is not.
So when we're collaborating with the state on the West Decay 10 plan, for
Right.
example,
Now you're starting, yeah,
this is falling under 3.1.
right.
We're setting the path for providing services out to that area. And then then the development would bring those services to its front door, right? And so some of it, like a state highway, isn't gonna be on a specific development to do. If the city needs a new water tower, that's usually a community-wide bit of infrastructure, or the wastewater treatment plant was a community-wide bit of infrastructure. But it opened up the capacity to keep going west, potentially south, so those kinds of things.
But you don't see us annexing property unless there's a potential development opportunity.
Correct. And usually at their request.
Could you define under section 4, facilitating orderly planned development?
Well, I think that's the basis of what we're putting forth, is orderly in terms of using our master plan, in terms of our land use plans to do development from the inside out when there's a need and when it's appropriate, so that we're not 360 degrees around the city trying to do things, scatter our resources around.
And this is just talking specifically tier 2, right?
Right, in tier 2,
Okay.
so that it's, and, the rest of that sentence is to establish clearly establish a boundary between rural and urban parts of our community, so that we're not jumping over rural areas to do urban type of development. Try to do it in an orderly fashion.
And when you say
out.
facilitating orderly planned development, what you're really, are you getting at the idea of sustainable expansion of infrastructure?
Well, that, and trying not to create those islands of unincorporated area.
I get concerned about statements like that being the best parts of our city were, and really most any city, were organically and unorderly developed.
And moving on to page 20.
Back real quick from 1919,
Okay.
4.3, preserve sensitive lands through site planning, platting, and design. Maybe we should add that to the implementation plan as well. fly.
Don't we do it now
Is it
through
kinda-
site planning?
Isn't that kind of done just as it occurred?
Yeah, there's probably, I think there's another policy
That's-
statement
Is
that's
there?
in there that has to do with it, expanding that idea of protecting sensitive lands.
To all development. And
Yes.
Bill, I made a note to double check that that one is in implementation. It's in another section.
Okay. Yeah, it's under industrial. I see it.
It's under all of the,
Okay.
Because I think we currently do it with residential.
Right.
What we want to do it is with industrial and commercial, where we don't do it now.
Makes sense.
Okay, you ready to move on to 20? Just recognizing we have quite a few pages to go. Make our review. Moving on to 21.
I'm curious what, under 7.10, what is meant by advanced parking strategies?
Robotic parking.
Well, it's getting at this whole discussion we've been having for months about the future of transportation and parking, and we want to advance the idea through our policies that we need to look at and be accepting of parking strategies. And really, we say transit-served areas and for compact mixed-use developments, make that stronger connection between the transportation and the land use.
So it's not limited to robotics. So that's trying to clarify.
Could be,
Like, this could be just having a overlay district that allows for parking in an entire area, not in front of one site.
it could be getting to a different parking code for a transit area, a TOD area, versus the other less served areas. It could be, and I'm telling you, this is one that looks good on paper, but when you put it in front of a planning commission, we get a room full of people that demand as high a parking capacity as possible with it. So we need to aspire to at least be open to parking strategies that are, that serve the context of a project and not just straight across the board, from greenfield to mixed use. So there are differences.
We require a lot of space just for tricycle parking.
Moving on to 22. Oh, nice pictures. 23.
You've automated bicycle.
We got the
Is the community, sorry, is the community design manual what we're getting in our mid-month meeting?
Yes. So the community design manual right now has standards for commercial development and industrial development. There's been talk for years about multi-dwelling residential development, creating standards that we would apply at time of site planning.
But currently, we only have it for commercial and industrial.
Correct.
so does that link work? Because I tried to click on that link at one point.
Check.
Yeah, community design manual, I couldn't find it.
Because it does exist.
it just worked, I'm on a live version.
Okay.
I didn't even try it.
Yeah, I tried it about a week or so ago.
It's,
And when I searched it on the city website, it didn't even show up. That's good.
it's a large document, so if you haven't opened it on that computer, then it might take a while to load.
So we have lots of things about encourage. But I still get the calls that say we discourage. And that's on infill and commercial. So what can we do to help that situation? It says encourage across the board, and I had somebody call me last week, just frustrated because they were having to do a large traffic study on an existing location. that the density was going down for traffic count.
Well, I don't, I mean,
So that's it, but you know where I'm coming from.
Well,
We
you
go
st-
through all these same
you
things.
still have to meet the
right?
code, I mean,
Yeah,
there's still a
Well,
code
that's what I
standards
said,
to meet.
but we have all those codes set in place again that discourage them from wanting to do anything, and these people about left. And they said, we don't have it in any other community we deal with, and they're jumping me through so many hoops in an existing site, not new, not expanding, just existing. And so when I read it, look at it, it looks like we are embracing somebody doing a commercial development inside our community and something just, and we don't. And so I'm not sure, I don't even know how to word craft it, because we have had courage, we encourage, right? It says we encourage,
And we do,
but when we get to the table, we discourage.
well,
So that's, how do
when we
we,
get
how
to
do
the
we
table,
word craft that accordingly?
we may have issues like a traffic issue where perhaps it's not, you know, meeting the needs of the whole transportation system, or maybe there's been accidents there, whatever the issue is, we're still gonna have issues to address with it. So,
And I understand that, how do we encourage it
How do
in
we-
our commercial development inside our city? Not new,
So jumping in here, that's probably a function of the city commission, planning commission, and staff. But to have this encouragement in our plan is at least a start.
and that's why I'm just
It's the-
asking for a
it's the
little word
right
crafting on
language.
it, because it says encourage across the board, but when we get down to it, it's not, so I don't know how to.
But we-
Unfortunately, I don't see any,
We would
again,
aspire
I don't
to
get
be
into the weeds of the
encouraging, right.
details, just like we did, because
Right.
it doesn't do us any good. I just don't know how to craft it in order to help sustain that development
right.
on infill.
And I would say that for every story you hear about that, we've maybe done 3 site plans where we did some administrative waivers on certain standards to help get that commercial area redeveloped.
And so I guess I want to make sure that we still have that ability.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that, because that's where it comes down
I
to, right?
wonder if it's a task
Planning.
for us, because it would be helpful, I think, to know what kinds of things, I mean, this is something that came up through the public input process. What kinds of things could we suggest to help make it easier to do infill? I mean, if it's a traffic study, that certainly needs to be done, but is it, I mean, we've seen projects, to Scott's point, we've seen projects where we've made accommodations to try to help the project move along, but I don't see that in the plan, like, here's some things you could do, am I missing that somewhere, or?
Well, I think because a lot of that happens at the zoning code level, not the
Yeah,
30,000
that's kind of
foot level.
plan stuff.
Well,
It's kind of
that
this,
opening it could be
system.
into implementation, I think Scott makes a great point. If you look at these chapters talking about encouragement, there's almost nothing in the implementation phase.
For the commercial side of what we're doing.
To wordsmith on the commercial side, the number one thing would be to analyze our current parking code. We have parking standards, but if you actually look at the history of parking standards, there's very little evidence of any kind of scientific method to determine what those standards are. So we've inherited or adopted basically arbitrary parking standards that then we overlay on every development that we do. And they tend to be the sticking point for just about everything.
But I think where
Why can't that be-
where you may be surprised to hear is the sticking point usually is they want more parking than our code requires. And it's trying to back them down into a lesser parking. Because especially the retailers who are planning for the, holiday rush and not the day-to-day rush. So that's why we have, but that's not the point. The point is the corporation wants,
I'm talking about, we're talking about infill. We're talking about infill.
sure. And I guess I'm just saying that there's a balance between all those. And there's a market that actually wants more parking than our code even requires in some instances.
You're talking commercial, more
Mhm,
commercial versus multifamily or residential.
So back to this encourage language for commercial development, is that new, is that different from Horizon 2020? Is there a need for a culture change in the zoning code, is similar to how we had in the county recently, to just show that this is really the direction we want to go? Because things that don't come to the public process, if they don't make it as part of the public process, we don't have any, way to double check that it's conforming with what we as a community have decided to put in our compass.
We'll work on this issue. Because I think there's a lot, you're looking at the tip of the iceberg on this issue, and there's a whole lot under
Yeah,
that.
I mean, this
we've
is kind of the whole
evolved,
system's
yeah.
internal
Yeah.
Very well stated,
conversation. So how about moving on to 24?
I wanna spend 31 more minutes on this.
We've got a long way to go, so
No, on
we're
21.
gonna pick up the pace.
2.5, the traffic impacts, is that, I'm assuming that's exclusive to automobile traffic? And just curious if that could be multi-modal.
Cause it's, I mean, it's
Auto traffic.
It's really intended for auto traffic because that's the impact to the greater impact to the residential neighborhood. It's really looking at that transition from commercial to other land
Specifically
uses.
thinking about the 19th Street corridor.
Mhm.
And, you know, the traffic impact on the surrounding area, minimizing commercial traffic through residential neighborhoods, seem like this speaks directly to that. There's no standard for what it means to minimize commercial traffic. And,
But that's KU, isn't it?
Well, it's because it's,
you know, we're talking about building a bigger street, it's not really KU yet. People would likely not cut through there, they would wait till they got through to Haskell, or even Mass before they come over to KU.
it's intended to, evaluate, make sure we're looking at that impact issue and mitigate where possible. But it does compete with the value of good transportation networks throughout the city. And we're trying to do more, actually mixing business and residential uses. So as we do that, we should be looking at the traffic impacts and minimizing it as we can. Sometimes that means disperse in more directions. Sometimes it means traffic calming. But a lot of that's at the weed level, not the comp plan level.
I think it could well say auto traffic, because that's what you're mitigating, foot traffic and bicycle traffic through residential neighborhoods would be a problem.
Right.
A vehicle, maybe, so, yeah.
Yeah.
3.3, commercial development shall avoid substantial disruption of natural vegetation and drainage. What's substantial disruption?
That's right. Yep, that's what Patrick said, whatever we say it is. No, I think we acknowledge that certain land uses like commercial, industrial, can't work around some of the natural features like residential can. And so we still want to put that out there, though. We aspire to that goal that they're doing as much as possible to avoid disrupting the natural vegetation and drainage. We don't want moving entire drainage ways around the site to, when we can maintain it, if it works for that development.
So there's no indicators as to what that tipping point is between disruption and substantial.
Not spelled out here.
We'll see how that plays out from that
Yeah.
2.8.
Yeah,
the-
yeah,
the
right,
plan.
3.8, yep.
Okay, on to 20, can't see,
25.
25.
I will say that this idea of protecting environmentally sensitive lands for commercial and industrial uses is new to the code, is new to the plan, would be new to the code, and would be, would take some code amendments and some practice at using it in a responsible, feasible way.
To discourage development.
To balance discouraging versus allowing development, yeah.
Under 5.7, encourage commercial uses to be integrated into residential areas. It seems, I'm trying to understand how to square that with 2, which is require compatible transitions from commercial development to other land uses. Those seem like opposite statements.
Well, I think but I think it's contact based. We want to mix uses more, but we don't want to do it at great impact to either one. I mean, for example, how many commercial districts can you think of that just completely turns its back to the neighborhood and back of it? Put up the fence, there's maybe perimeter ways around the neighborhood to get to it. So we wanna be able to mix that into a neighborhood.
But that's what the neighborhood wants.
Yeah.
They don't want to be.
Not necessarily.
Well, it depends where it is though, that's what I say, there's no generalized statement.
If there's a way to walk through instead of having, I mean, I'm thinking where I live,
Yeah.
it's exactly like that.
But-
I'm told to put fences up, so,
Well, you put a fence-
I mean, that's,
You have,
and I'm told to fix them so nobody can walk through them.
Yeah, you can put a fence up though where you're walking through.
And they don't want them.
but I think this is a policy that we go back and revisit our sector plans with and try to get that, because I think as we have the opportunity to build new neighborhoods,
Yeah.
it should be a bigger part of what we look at in 30 years and look back and say, okay, this looks different than the years 75 through 2015.
Yeah, I think if it was built that way to start with, people wouldn't complain. It's like, we have it now, we,
You gotta set enough public meetings.
Okay, so we jumped from 25 to 27. Is there any comment on 26? All right, anything else on 27?
The 5.13, the require land use plan was dropped from one draft to the next, and I was just curious why.
Was that under
What
which
did you
heading?
say?
What were you at?
Yeah.
On commercial strip development, there,
5
okay, there is an existing 513, but that's because the previous 513 was dropped under commercial strip development. There was,
Oh,
that
I
was
see.
512
Up in
and
the
513, which
mid-range.
was require a land use plan with any zoning application request, and it was removed. I just didn't know.
So I think that's because our commercial strip development per our code is intended to not expand. We do nodal commercial nodes now going forward. And so we have just very limited expansion of our commercial strip, the CS zoning in particular. And so there, I think we just determined that there's, since it's not supposed to expand, there's no reason to have a land use plan associated with it.
Okay.
Is that your recollection?
5.15, just the way this talks about downtown Lawrence, it says maintain and increase core concentration of retail, office, civic, cultural, and recreational activities in downtown. When it's moving towards this demand, kind of wanting to have residential integrated to all of that, and it kind of, I think we've still got this hangover of separate uses. We talk about mixed use, we talk about integrated uses, we talk about integrated first commercial with residential, and then we leave off residential in that statement.
Well, because this is under the commercial section of this chapter, I think there's a corresponding one in residential that speaks to downtown.
That is correct, and the policy was right before it, is promote a broad mix of uses and activities in downtown.
So that if we could add something about,
It was just speaking to the
I
commercial,
get that, that's the problem.
but it's in the commercial. We've got the corresponding in the residential.
That's not what, we're siloing it. So when somebody reads it, we're just reinforcing this language that downtown doesn't have residential here. And somebody just looked at it exactly. And vice versa.
Really, where is it under the residential section?
So we'll look to see if it's here too, let's see. I may stand corrected here.
Well, under tier one, under all of those policies. Back to the increasing the height density, talking about variety of housing types. don't have a specific neighborhoods mentioned.
Yeah, without saying downtown.
There is something in here, but I remember seeing downtown.
Just kidding, we can look at it.
We can do something probably near 8.4 or 8.5. 8.4. If you want to specifically call out downtown.
I'm just comfortable with adding residential as perfectly normal aspect of what downtown is, downtown was. I don't see them as mutually exclusive, and this makes them appear mutually exclusive.
I don't think it needs to be in 515 though, because that's in the commercial section. I don't think we need to talk about residential there.
We'll look at
So
it.
you guys wanna work on that then in planning?
It should be, I think it should be consistent throughout the document.
Okay, duly noted. I see you writing notes yourself. On to page 28.
The very top line, 5.17, enhance appropriate areas of the Kansas River as an urban amenity to surrounding neighborhoods. What does that mean?
Well,
I mean,
there's been discussion through the whole public comment period that the river is underutilized as a place of enjoyment for the citizens or the development of it. Like you see in some urban areas where you might, see mixed-use retail, or mixed-use development against it, or boardwalks and different amenities, or canoe ramps or different things. I mean, it's that mix of recreation and entertainment and living close to it and working close to it. So that's where we got this policy.
Okay. Is that specifically to the south bank of the river?
It's undefined. In fact, we'll be looking at it, I think, much deeper with our downtown master plan coming up. But
Does it have an associated task? I didn't look it up.
Moving on to 29. Thirty, nice picture. 31.
Um, 1.2, industrial, sites shall have adequate land size generally over 40 acres. Did that get changed? Never mind, it's already been changed.
yeah, that's been changed to varied in size.
And then primarily, 1.3, primarily out of the regulatory floodplains. Is there any guidelines or a percentage or an acreage or a?
So this whole floodplain discussion is
Yes.
captured in, I think, better captured in policies that talk about strengthening the regulations. And then that really is an implementation, future implementation exercise to see what the outcome of that is. The reason it reads this way in industrial is sometimes industrial land seeks the kind of the flatter areas, and sometimes those are in floodplain areas. And so that's why we talk about it in those terms here. Because it may be that you have some competing values about putting some primary employment in the ground, and it's in a floodplain area.
But that being primarily out of it, you're saying, a whole development would not be considered, but if a portion of it might fall into
Right.
that.
It's saying that when we're considering new areas of industry, we want to make sure that floodplain is part of the conversation, so that we can not take large chunks of the floodplain up for industrial development.
And then you go to 1.4 and say it shall contain minimal slopes, so you're not gonna let them out of the floodplain?
Well, minimal slope, so. that
Don't
could
go in
be
the
a-
floodplain, but don't go on the slope.
Somewhere in between.
Somewhere in
Yeah,
between.
yeah.
Makes a lot of
Hover.
sense.
On to 32.
On 1.9, which is still on, in terms of transportation linkages and multimodal, are we talking about moving people or are we talking about moving goods? So by multimodal, are we talking like rail lines or are we talking like bike paths?
Yes.
Multimodal,
Everything under the sun, that ties back to Transportation 2040, which is highways, rail, freight, bike, and the whole 9 yards.
Drone? Drone?
Could be.
Okay, good, just to make sure.
especially with industrial, you have that truck component added into it as well.
Carry on to 32.
And partnerships, is that like a public-private partnership? Encourage partnerships for redevelopment opportunities? Is that what is intended there?
I think it speaks to the economic development organizations and partnerships we have that's required in a lot of ways for redeveloping sites or just getting industrial land on the ground and zoned.
On to 33.
We're gonna make it
Are we?
Mm-hmm.
34, 35, pretty picture. All right,
So that was a healthy discussion. We will take all those comments back to our drawing board. We do have one more agenda item if you have opportunity and energy. It could be a quick one. It's determining, looking at alternative title page designs. And I apologize if I'm the one that brought this forward, but I can't remember if I am, or if was comment that you all made about it, but, okay, so so this is the current one, right? What's the current one? This one, right?
Yeah.
Oh, this did come out of the committee, I think, talked about doing more of a
Better protocol, right?
composition collage.
Yeah, I definitely like a collage with people. I think people are the biggest resource and asset.
Okay.
The more we put people in it, the better. And we got some great people shot throughout all the chapters.
I like something that incorporates the county as well as the city.
Okay.
Like to see
thank you
commercial.
very much.
Maybe scooters, some fake palm trees.
Yeah, there you go.
So we're hearing energy going to this alternative title page.
I would, if this was gonna be the final draft, I would say the lower left-hand, bottom picture was fantastic, neighborhood project that had a huge fail. And has had to be or is being redone.
It hasn't been right.
So it's gonna invite some snarkiness.
Put a little salt in some wounds.
You can take my block off.
No, it's fantastic, but it's like, it was a very public fail
I
of a
would not
project.
design
Yeah.
it
Can we
like
find another
this,
thing?
with a straight grid. I would do different size pictures and make it less symmetric in your design.
Just from a aesthetic.
Yep, from an aesthetic standpoint.
It's an improvement.
Okay, we're on the right track with the title page.
Do we
Got-
have a title? I forgot.
What's the title?
Plan 2040.
And 2040.
Oh, is that for real? That's it?
That's our
Yes,
recommendation.
Our time in hell.
We have T 2040
Does that mean we have to start the 2060 plan, like
pretty
next year?
soon, yeah. No, there's a reason planning directors do this every 10 to 15 years.
Do the next title.
Job security.
All right, so,
I got
Oh, go
one
ahead.
thing, about the next meeting isn't till July. Why is it being put off so long?
Well, it was important that we had commitment, at least everybody's schedule could open up. Plus, we need some time to make these revisions and then get them back out for everybody's consumption. So we thought that that would work. We hoped that it would work.
And did you say you are taking public comment on the next draft?
Well, anybody can provide public comment any time, right? And we post those to the group. So what I'm anticipating is that when our final version comes out, it'll be with enough weeks to let the public see it, study it, maybe meet with their groups on it, and then issue maybe a letter to the group. But I'm going to encourage the committee to release this to the process, which, as you know, is Planning Commission, City Commission, County Commission.
Sooner rather than later. It's been 4 years.
Yes,
something
it
like
has.
So everything you're talking about after July.
Yes.
You think you'll have it out in September, right?
We'll have it out on July 17th if all goes well. Up to this committee.
October.
All right, anything else? Adjourned. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.